I'm Lisa Skaife, and this is the Good People Podcast.
It's a tip of the cap, it's a pat on the back, it's a smile from ear to ear. They're the good people from round here.
Welcome to another episode of the Good People Podcast, brought to you by In Other Good News. My name is Andy, and I'm sitting here today with the founder of mydriveschool.com. Her name is Lisa Skaife, and she is on a mission to reduce road traumas across the country with her program mydriveschool.com. It's an award-winning program. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
It's a pleasure. We've covered a lot of topics on this podcast, all sorts of stuff, but we've never covered road traumas and things like that. And right now is a great time to talk about it because of all of the things that are happening. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking some time out to tell us about what you're doing. I guess firstly, what is mydriveschool.com?
Well, My Drive School is a simulation game to teach people how to drive online. It was created, we actually came up with the concept in 2012. It took a lot of years, a lot of research and a lot of development to actually release a program. We released our first program in 2019, and that went at the Australian Grand Prix, and that went on to win the Australasian Serious Games Congress the same year, with the highest score in the history of the event.
Yeah, right. And so what's it? So serious games. I mean, that sort of alludes to what it is, I guess. What is the serious?
Yeah, the program is actually a combination of simulation, gaming, AI. So, it's all about actually kids actually having fun and learning from game-based learning, which is actually sort of multimodal learning, which increases retention rates, increases engagement considerably.
Yep.
And we're talking to digital natives, so we need to talk to them in their own language.
Yeah, sure. And so I guess because when you start driving, you basically just do it. You do a bit of book work, and then all of a sudden you're behind the wheel.
I mean, I look at it as quite ridiculous and unbelievably antiquated. They read a book, which most of the time they don't, to be perfectly honest. No teenager wants to read that book. Yeah. It is really boring. So they get online and do a heap of practice tests. Then they can read a book, get their learners, and then miraculously they can get in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And, nobody actually even wants to sit in the passenger seat either with them. Like, that's not cool for anyone. It's not great. You have to get a certificate to climb up a ladder 1.5 meters, but you can get in the passenger seat with somebody who's never driven before and is battling to know which pedal's what. Yeah. And they're in control of a 1-ton lethal weapon. And you don't have dual controls or anything. So you're sitting there just completely, I don't know.
I'm sure any parent who's had the opportunity to sit with an L-plater, especially a brand new L-plater, could vouch for what you're saying.
Yeah, every single parent I've spoken to has especially if they're in that pain point, they're all panicking. Yeah. We actually did a survey quite some time ago, and I asked, do you think simulation training would be a good way to teach teenagers? Yes. Do you think this should be included into the graduated learning system? Yes. Do you think we should run it through schools? Yes. And all the percentages were like, 98.5%, 99%. And then I asked a question, would you like your teenager to have done some simulation training before you had to sit in the car with them? 100%.
So have a bit more.
Yeah, then they really felt it was like, yeah, absolutely, I want them all to have simulation training.
Yeah. So simulation training is something, and we must say, so you've grown up in motorsport. You were born into it, basically. Yeah. You have spent your entire life through various roles, doing all sorts of stuff to do with motorsport. Now, motorsport is heavily regulated. Safety is key. I mean, the hooking around tracks at hundreds of k's an hour, safety is key.
Absolutely.
So it's not really a stretch to see why this sort of topic would come to you as something that you might want to pursue, because out on the roads is very different, much less regulated. People can get into whatever sort of car they want. Yeah. Is there any sort of statistics around different, I don't know, socioeconomic groups and accidents and...
Well, yeah, there are. Disadvantaged kids are actually 2 to 3 times more likely to be involved in road trauma than not. And I suppose that's got to do with, kids from a higher socioeconomic background are probably going to be in more or later model vehicles with a lot more safety features
Yep.
than kids that haven't got those tools.
Yeah. So if you learn to drive in a new car with all the beepers and all of the warning signals and lane change and all that sort of stuff, you're much less likely to have an
And a lot
accident.
more airbags, all that sort of stuff. You've got
Yeah.
all those safety features. And chances are, coming from that background, you'll probably have a lot more professional tuition as well,
Yeah.
rather than just mum and dad.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't believe that, that's the best way forward. 120 hours with mum and dad that have got 20 to 30 years of bad habits isn't a great... we can't expect kids to come out the other end being amazing drivers
Yeah.
when they've taught from people, that have got a lot of bad habits.
Yeah. And do you think, when I learned to drive, we didn't have the 120 hours. Do you reckon the 120 hours has helped things?
In all honesty, no. I was actually just recently in the UK. We were doing a sort of a small press release type thing for drive school in the UK. And I was on a panel discussing the graduated licensing system. And in Australia, we're ranked 12th overall in road safety. But in the 18 to 25-year-old age bracket, we're rated 15th. And not one of the top 10 countries has a 120-hour graduated licensing system. So it's not world's best practice.
Right.
UK, they're rated in that age group, they're rated about 4th or 5th. And they don't have any amount of hours that you have to do. But most people have, on average, between 30 and 40 hours of professional instruction.
Right.
And that's just standard, and it's not mandated, but people actually just go and get, at least 30 or 40 hours with professionals.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different thing it should be based on competency, not hours.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you've got 120 hours of bad
Of
instruction...
bad habits, yeah, that's not good.
That's the opposite of good.
Yeah, absolutely. And they get very much attuned to having their mum or their dad or whoever go, did you see that car? What about that? And that extra set of eyes. So then by the time they're solo, they're just sort of, or they're thinking that they've got that safety net when they don't.
You've bred some different habits that may or may not be useful downstream.
Yeah.
So, you've built this, like I say, professionally, you've come from high-paced motorsport, but then you've got your own children. And would you say that your children were, a catalyst for you to think more about driver training?
Oh, absolutely they are. So my partner, he also works in professional motorsport. He's an engineer. And we've got 2 boys. And statistically, boys are killing themselves 4 to 1. So even before they could walk, Rich was sort of saying to me, he was already worried about them on the road. And I was like, what are you worried about? I'll teach them how to drive. They'll be amazing. And he was like, Lise, you might want to have more of a think about that, or have a look at the stats around it. And when I started to research it, I was absolutely flabbergasted at the rate of fatality. But it's not just the rate of fatality. That's what we hear about all the time, which is bad. But also the injuries and serious injuries.
Yeah.
That's actually so this year's road tolls. I think it's up. I think it's up 40% or something on last year.
This year, yeah.
But usually, so it's the worst in 17 years or something, I think, at the moment. But also, so for every 1 death, there's about 40 to 50 injuries. And of those 40 to 50, 12.5% of them will be lifelong injuries.
Right. So there we're talking about being paralysed or something like that.
Acquired brain injuries, paraplegia, quadriplegia.
Right. And I imagine then with so many injuries, deaths are horrific and they ruin communities and they ruin families, but also the cost of looking after someone who's in their early 20s who has an accident and is then paraplegic or something like that, that'd be a horrendous cost as well, wouldn't it?
Well, it's estimated that for an 18-year-old to become a paraplegic, it's approximate about $5 million for their lifetime care.
Yep.
But it's not just the financial cost, it's the emotional cost.
So, I mean, so it costs, I guess, if you think about it from a cost perspective, the cost of the government or health services or whatever is really high for looking after someone who sustained these injuries. But then the cost to do, say, the training would balance it out, right? Wouldn't it? Like,
Oh, well, I mean, the return on, if you actually provided a lot better training. So our program, for example, before we launched the program, we went out to a driver training facility
Yep.
and did a blind randomised test where we got students, none of whom have ever driven before. And we, half of them did my drive school first, and the other half got straight in the car and did a government-funded 20-minute lesson.
oh, yep.
And the instructors, professional independent instructors, that, by the way, weren't actually that keen on drive school because they thought I was taking their business from them.
Yeah.
So I was like,
Stealing
"I'm not,
business.
not." And they didn't know who'd done what when, and they had to rate all the kids. And the kids that did my drive school first came out 48% more competent and 17% less anxious.
Yep.
So if you turn around and went, okay, well, if simulation, and in the first 3 years of driving, over 90% of fatalities are caused by driver error. So if we
Right.
can increase their competency by nearly 50%, obviously, that,
The knock-on effect.
yeah.
Yeah, that's like, it's massive, isn't it? Do you know, you told me actually, when we first spoke, you told me about another success of the program. There was a person who won a competition. There was a competition around...
That was Gran Turismo.
Tell me about that.
So this is basically what made me sort of come up with the idea for drive school. I was researching all sorts of things and simulation, but simulation, obviously you can't get all the kids to a simulator or the simulator to all the kids. It's cost and resource prohibitive.
Yeah.
But then I found this case study on PlayStation who created this game called GT Academy. And GT Academy, they had this worldwide competition, and the prize was a full season in an open wheeler around Europe racing.
Right. So they got to drive the
Yeah,
driver?
real race,
Yeah,
real race cars racing around all over Europe.
Yep.
So a brilliant prize. So they got, I think it was nearly 40,000 entrants, but they got the top 20 and took them to Brands Hatch, which is a racetrack in UK, with Johnny Herbert and a few others, and trained them for 2 weeks. And the young guy who won was a Spaniard by the name of Lucas Ordonez. And he was only 19. And prior to him winning this, had never sat his butt in a real race car. And he won the whole prize, and only the year before last finished his full-time professional racing career. So I looked at it and went, oh my God, if he can learn that higher cognitive skills and that sort of stuff using a flat screen plus a portable steering wheel and pedal set, I can teach people how to drive. So I went out and bought Gran Turismo and one of those steering wheels and pedal sets, brought it home to my engineer and went, Rich, I need you to look at this. I need you to play with it and tell me what you think. And he did. And he went, oh, that's actually really quite cool. He said it'd be even better if it was in VR and blah, blah. So he gave me a heap of feedback. So after that, I went off and the problem was nobody had software that was designed for early stage novice drivers.
Yep.
The only thing, anything like what I wanted to provide was out of Russia, of all places, which launched in 2007. But I didn't like it. It was on the wrong side of the road, all that stuff. So we had to start from scratch and design and develop our own program, which we did. And, ours can be played in VR or in full simulators or as simply as on a laptop with a portable steering wheel and pedal set.
Yeah, so in effect, someone's sitting in a virtual car,
Yeah.
pedals steering wheel,
Yep.
and they drive around regular-ish roads,
Yep.
making regular decisions.
Yes, so we start them off in a driver training facility.
Yep.
And just sort of learning about, vehicle maneuverability and, and how much lock to put on, and they do slaloms and I mean, the slalom's the only exercise in the program that doesn't have a speed limit and we meaningly did that because we actually want people to try and do it as fast as they want,
Yep.
but at a certain speed, that car will not turn in. And we want kids to actually understand that before they get in a real car. I mean, we want them to make their mistakes online, not on road.
Yeah,
So
risk-free.
yeah, so, otherwise all the other exercises in the program, if you speed, you fail. If you don't put your blinker on, you fail. If you don't stop properly at the stop sign, you fail. All these things you fail. And it's a really boring fail. It's not like a Gran Turismo, one of those Grand Theft Auto ones.
No fire.
And you go, nothing like that. It's just a really boring cross on the screen and it tells you why you failed.
Is it gentle on you?
Yes.
Right. So we're saying that someone can do driver simulation and end up being a professional, a very good race car driver. We're seeing that driver simulation can build muscle memories and skills so that by the time you hit the road, you're far more able, I guess.
Oh, competent, yeah.
Yeah, competent to hit the road. We're trying, you are, on a mission to reduce these road traumas. I mean, you're not someone who's, you've been affected by road trauma yourself.
Yeah, I was involved in a fatality when I was 22. I was driving back down from Sydney, where I'd spent Christmas, and I was following a car towing a caravan, and somebody coming the opposite way fell asleep, sideswiped the car, the caravan jackknifed, head on to me, and about 3 or 4 behind me, and his car exploded and he died.
Which is horrific, isn't it? Like that's
absolutely horrific, and that's probably another reason which has really prompted me to do something. I mean, we haven't changed the way we teach people how to drive for 50 years.
Yeah.
And the technology is there, and the resources are there. I think now we just need to get on with it, to actually help people understand how driving can be so dangerous, but also increase their competency levels and understanding of things like driving with trucks or cycles or any of those things. We can't safely train them to do that in a real world environment, but we can online.
Yeah, that's right. And so, like, when we talk about who this is for, I mean, who are you designing this for? We know it's obviously for learner drivers, and we talk about access to things in different socioeconomic environments. What's your plan with this to get it to people?
Well, I mean, to be perfectly honest, in 2019, when I launched the program, I genuinely did design it for 15 to 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
But after that and COVID and all sorts of other things, we've actually realised it is so beneficial for so many other markets. The program's now been classified as an assistive technology for anybody on the NDIS, and works really well with people, neurodiverse people, people with ABIs. We've had people with cystic fibrosis, stroke victims, all sorts of different issues we can deal with. We also work with culturally and linguistically disadvantaged, Indigenous people. We've got we work with the Clontarf Foundation, and that's all Indigenous youth. PCYC, they do a lot of at-risk and vulnerable youths as well. We do a lot of different cohorts now. Even the elderly, we're looking to go to Japan with the elderly.
All right.
We're looking to Saudi Arabia. They only let women drive a few years ago. So we're looking also going into there, because now they can drive, but they have an issue about who's going to teach them with their cultural barriers.
Right. So there's okay. So they've only just started driving. I didn't know that.
Only a few years ago, yeah.
God. So there's a shortage of people, or is it a cultural thing that they're not sure?
A cultural thing, because they still need to be have somebody with them,
right.
And
who can do that. And what about rural communities?
I mean, that's a huge one. In Australia, obviously, about 66% of fatalities are all in rural and remote areas. Right. And there's a lot of things. The roads are different. There's different hazards. You've got a lot more trucks, haulage. But in saying that, of the 17% of fatalities that involve a truck, 80% of them, it's not the truck driver's fault.
Yeah, okay.
So it's actually people learning how to share the road with trucks. Some of those might be freight trains or big trucks, putting 2 wheels in the gravel to let one come the opposite way, all things like that. Speed is obviously an issue. Runoff on the side of roads, there's obviously a lot of big trees. You've got other hazards like wildlife.
Yeah.
But again, we can actually prepare and train people for all those things
through
online.
through the simulation. And is this something that you think the government might pick up, to get into?
Absolutely. That is our ultimate goal. We want this to be a part of the graduated licensing system.
Yep.
Because it is by far the safest way to learn how to drive and learn how to train for all those various and multiple situations.
Yeah, because, again, I guess country kids do have an advantage in that there is a quiet place for them to go to drive in the early stages. I know as a country person myself, I know that my dad could take me out the road, and
Me too. Yeah, we hit a paddock basher.
Yeah. So we could drive down a gravel road or something like that. Not that I did a heap of that, but it was an option. I was able to do that. Whereas I know in the city, you're kind of straight out there and you're straight on
Traffic.
You're straight on in traffic and stuff. Yeah. But I do know that it is very different driving on a narrow country road at 100 k's than it is driving down, the Eastern Freeway at 100 k's. And as someone who grew up in the country, tailgating for me is a huge thing because you just don't do it.
No.
I mean, firstly, you're going to get a rock in your window but if you do it in the country. But I notice here that whenever we drive, and we often drive across to Adelaide, you can tell the difference in the driving styles as soon as you hit the extended periods on the roads. There's the bumper to bumper. It's not realising that you need that space to brake. It's there's so many
but
dangerous...
just a lot of courtesy,
Yeah.
with some of that. It doesn't actually get you there faster.
No.
By being right up the back of somebody else.
No.
All it does is increase everybody's anxiety.
Yeah.
The instance of road rage and what have you, it's getting horrendous.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Now, the other thing that's interesting is, which you were telling me about another time, is that the difference between, and this is on your website as well, the training for driver training versus something like swimming.
Oh, so we did a case study on this from 2016. And in 2016 in Australia, 264 people aged between 18 and 25 died on our roads and 23 drowned. Yet we have 6 years of compulsory swimming lessons and absolutely no driver training in high schools.
Yeah, it's stark, isn't it?
So when I first sort of came up with this whole idea, Laurie Lawrence was very instrumental in getting swimming lessons into schools and, really promoting the importance of swimming lessons for young kids. So I knew that Bev Brock knew Laurie Lawrence quite well.
Yep.
And it was after Peter died, but I rang Bev and said, Bev, I need to talk to Laurie Lawrence. I need to ask him, how he did this. And anyway, so she gave me his number and I called him and I said, this is what I want to do. And, you were really instrumental in that. I need to do that for driving lessons. And he said, and I said, what'd you do? How'd you do it? He said, Lisa, I just banged my head up against a brick wall for a long, long, long time until somebody listened. I was like, oh, really? Really? I've got to do that.
That's what you got to do. That's what's ahead.
I was like, that doesn't sound... Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like fun, but anyway, that's what we're still doing.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a worthwhile cause. And I guess, getting it to the hands, like you were saying, getting it to be something that potentially is government funded so that it can get into the hands of more people, right? That's the goal. Just more.
Well, it should be an investment. I mean, driver training, so many governments look at it as a cost centre. And it shouldn't be a cost centre, it should be an investment. So if we can reduce fatalities by 50%, I mean, in Australia, road trauma costs $30 billion a year.
Right.
Which is $82 million per day.
Right.
We can actually, Victoria, for example, we can actually provide simulation training to all kids in government schools, design a couple of buses to go around to regional and remote, and deliver 60,000 simulation lessons, or lessons to 60,000 students for under $5 million.
Right.
So that's less than the cost of one 18-year-old becoming a paraplegic.
The cost of the system for one person becoming,
And we can deliver simulation training to 60,000.
Yeah. And if again, referring back to that ratio, you were talking about the amount of injuries versus fatalities, because the road toll is a name that we're all familiar with, the road toll. But that is hundreds and hundreds of people, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands. So every year in Australia, there's about 45 to 50,000 people that are hospitalised.
Right.
And of those 45 to 50,000, over 25% are a high threat of death. So if it wasn't for all the driver aids and increased medical intervention, you'd put that 25% on top of our worst ever, and we'd be, our crash rate incidence is highest than it's ever been. So we haven't done anything to reduce the road toll. All we're doing is keeping people alive after they've crashed.
Right. So we're cushioning the blow.
Yeah.
In more ways than one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unreal, isn't it? I mean, with it, I feel like we're very slow in introducing new things, like such as, the outrage about seatbelts when they came in, and Victoria introduced the seatbelts.
Yes, Victoria were the first jurisdiction in the world to introduce the compulsory wearing of seatbelts, and still are saying they're world leaders in road safety. That was 53 years ago.
Yeah.
I'd like to think we could do a bit more.
We could do more than just introducing the seatbelt.
I mean, it was a great idea, don't get me wrong, but, you can't keep saying we're world leaders if that was your last, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. Now, tell me, there was another award you won. You won an award, was it I Wish I Did That?
Oh, yes, that was the Pause Awards last year. So the Pause Awards are like the... like the Oscars for innovation.
Right.
And
where was that? Where they hold those?
In Melbourne.
Right.
Yeah. And so we won that for excellence in the I Wish I'd Done That.
Right.
Because it's actually quite funny. Everybody I speak to just says, that's such a simple idea. Why didn't I do that? I'm like, well, I don't know why anybody didn't do it.
Yeah.
I find it a very simple idea. Simulation, is pretty simple. Pilots have been using it for a long, long time.
Yeah, and so I guess the hard bit for you is, the technology, getting the technology right so that it's realistic. I guess it's got to be pretty realistic. So that costs a lot of money to do that. I know you spent what, like 10 years already on this. Yes.
So, as I said, I came up with the idea in 2012. We launched the first program in 2019, and now here we are in 2023. We've spent, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on this.
Yeah.
And our early adopters were always the private schools. But I haven't spent 10 years of my life developing a program for elite private school kids. I actually want this for everybody.
Yeah, that's right. So because it's an everybody problem.
Yeah.
And I mean, the world is now, a lot of suburbs are built so that you drive. They're built, you don't have the access to, like an inner city suburb, you have your trams and buses and all that sort of stuff. A lot of these suburbs, they are built so that you drive to where you got to get to. So it's imperative. And also you've mentioned before about, it's not, a license isn't just a license, right? Like a license is far more than...
Oh, absolutely. And that's something I've really learned in the last few years. A license, for some people, especially, some of the Indigenous groups, that a license is their first form of identification. Their picture on it, their ID. But also not having a license is one of the biggest barriers of entry for employment. So we're working now with, employment service providers to actually help people start that process to get a license. Without a license, you've reduced employment prospects, your independence, your self-worth. It's a lot more than just being able to drive a car.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you can be pretty hamstrung limited opportunities for jobs, just because you don't have a... very regularly on a job ad, it says drivers...
It's compulsory. Yeah. Everybody needs a driver's license, We've been doing a heap of work with the Accommodation Association, and so many of those working in hospital or accommodation, when they're working late and whatever, they can't get trains, and they really do need them to have licenses.
Yeah.
Because it's a safety issue in the end.
Yeah.
getting to and from work in weird hours.
Yep.
So they really do require a license.
So if you need a license, and I mean that has economic knock-on effects because, if more people can get jobs because they have licenses, and then if those people who are driving are safe,
Yes.
we're creating taxpayers, and we're also reducing costs to the system for
Absolutely.
reduced traumas.
We've also designed a whole program that we're trying to get funding for, called Indie Drive, and it's actually about getting licenses and completely training from word go to getting them their full Ps, provisional licenses, Indigenous communities and Indigenous youth, because a lot of the mines and what have you really want to actually employ Indigenous, but so many of them don't have licenses. And for them, some of them, they don't have a birth certificate. So we need to get registrars out to communities to get them birth certificates. Then we're going to use some programs, mat work and what have you, to actually teach them all the road rules on mats. And this program comes in 8 different Indigenous languages. Then we'll use simulation training. Then we'll actually do hours with them and physically take them to go and get their licenses. So
wow,
that'll be I'm really looking forward to getting right into that and getting a lot more of, those kids that don't really have much of a chance if they can't get a job.
Yeah. And I'm really glad we've explored sort of the knock-on effect as well, because we all know like being a safe driver is important, but if it has so many other knock-on effects to help people with their day-to-day, like it's a good thing to do. Yeah. So into the hands of government, rural areas, you're going international. I mean, is there anything else on the cards?
I know it is sounding a bit big, isn't it? Well, yeah, I want to just keep creating more and more and more programs.
Yep.
Because I don't think, too much. There's no such thing as too much training.
Yep.
But if you can provide it in a fun and engaging way,
Yep.
Where people want to do it.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the whole thing. You can't tell teenagers want to do things for themselves. They want autonomy and they want to, they know everything as well, obviously.
Yep.
But if you can make the whole thing fun for them, we're all going to be a whole lot better off.
Yeah, absolutely. Gamifying has negative effects with certain things, but for learning, it is actually quite useful, isn't it?
Yeah, the multimodal learning, there's a lot of research on that it is, higher retention rates, more engaging, so therefore you're going to have a lot better success rates at the end.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Lisa Skaife from mydriveschool.com, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I think it's fantastic. I think it's something that's... it's a really interesting topic. Like I say, it's not something we've talked about here before, but it's very important. And, I have children who are going to be...
2 boys.
Who are going to be in that really, really high risk factor. Because it's also the first couple of years, isn't it? Like
the first 3 years. Over 90% of fatalities in the first 3 years are caused by driver error.
Yeah.
So we really do need to make sure the driver's more competent.
There is a direct correlation between when you get your Ps in the period of your life, when you get your Ps, but also when you are a young man with almost the most testosterone you'll ever have out there to prove yourself in the world by nature. Those two things align, and I feel like it's an extreme.
So it is. And a lot of people say that stuff, all about, underdeveloped frontal lobe, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And my response to that is usually, well, Lewis Hamilton had an underdeveloped frontal lobe when he won his first Formula One World Championship at 21.
Right.
But he can drive all right.
Yeah, he can drive pretty well.
Anybody at 18 to 20 years old should be at their absolute prime for any given physical task, whether or not it be tennis, golf, not many 18. Well, actually, they do play golf. But, like any sport, anything physical, you should be at your prime.
Yep.
Given the right training, you should be the best you'll ever be, not the worst.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, that's a really good point. Well, I wish you all the best getting this out there and getting it to as many people as possible. mydriveschool.com. And is there anyone that you want specifically to reach out at the moment? I mean, you're reaching outward, but who should come and talk to you about it?
Well, anybody who's interested in trying to help us get this to a lot more people.
Yeah.
We're working with a lot of employment service providers at the moment.
Yep.
Anybody in the disability sectors, cold, Indigenous, community groups, you know, at-risk and vulnerable groups we're really interested in.
Yeah.
That's where there's, you know, an overrepresentation of people in road trauma. So, you know, they're all the things that we really do want to try and address.
Yeah, and because at the end of the day, as long as they end up with the simple set of tools, which is the wheels and the pedals and whatnot, then they can go through the whole program and save lives.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, yeah. Well, I wish you all the best. Thank you, thank you so much for coming on to the Good People podcast. mydriveschool.com is where people can find you. And yeah, it's been great hearing about what you're doing.
Thanks very much, Andy. It's been really great to be here.
No, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Well, it's a tip of the cap, it's a pat on the back, it's a smile from ear to ear. They're the good people from round here. They're the good people from round here. Come on, let me introduce you to a few.